Gospel of Luke this morning. How about that? I have struggled with my mic all day today. Thought I had it on when it was off. Thought it was off when it was really on. That can be bad.
Especially if you're in the bathroom.
You joke, but that actually happened one time with my band director. We were doing a play, and he left it on. And luckily there were only about 4 people that heard everything, Kim. But I was not one of them, and I was really, really thankful. But these microphones that just travel with you, they can really get you in a lot of trouble if you're not careful. What a great example. All right, so a couple months ago, probably 2-3 months ago, I asked you guys for some sermon topics that you would like to hear from, that you would like to hear a little bit about this summer, some things that we would talk about, and I had a really great response. I had a lot of topics come in. I had one topic come in that I just would love to preach on, but I will not. It was suggested that we talk about smiting. And so we are not going to preach about smiting, just to put that out there. But we had questions about what it means to really be a disciple or a follower of Jesus. We had questions about, or sermon topics suggested about forgiveness, baptism, how and why, how not to be a marshmallow Christmas, or not to be a marshmallow Christian or Christmas. We had some great topics, and we're going to hit most of those. And then we had a couple people actually ask about the book Revelation, and so we're going to talk a little bit about all of that stuff this summer, so I hope that you're looking forward to that. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And I will tell you, some of those topics push me a bit outside my comfort zone, so we're going to work with it, and I think it's going to be good. So I'm really excited. Today, the first part of this You Asked For It series, we're talking about discipleship. And so we're going to look at the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, and we're going to start with verse 25. Now large crowds were traveling with him, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." This is a tough passage when we're talking about discipleship. See, a lot of times the church says, hey, just believe in Jesus and everything will be easy, right? The church just says, just begin to believe in Jesus and all your problems will go away. And honestly, I have heard some of those sayings pass through church. But that's not what Jesus says here. In fact, he goes and he says something very different. See, you've got to look at what was going on. Did you catch where Jesus was? He was traveling along, and large crowds of people had gathered around him. And they were traveling with him. Now, by this point in the gospel, at this point in the story of Jesus, he has been on the scene for a couple of years. People know who he is. He's done some wonderful miracles. He has healed people. He's provided food for the 5,000 people. He's gaining some popularity. This is the guy you want to hang around because you might get free stuff, or you might get what you're looking for. Beyond that, he's teaching the scriptures in a way that the teachers of the law can't even do. So, yeah, you might get some great free things, you might get what you're looking for, but you also have this possibility to learn from him and to grow. Sounds really good, doesn't it? And then, Jesus keeps talking bits and pieces about a kingdom. Well, most of the followers who are along are pretty sure that this is going to be the next king that's going to take over the area. And he's going to be able to set up shop right there, and they want to be in on the ground floor. Right? And if he can do miracles and heal people, people and feed multitudes of people, he can definitely beat the other side. This is going to be the winning side. And instead of Jesus saying, hey, you know what, guys, this is great. Come with me, come along. Let's have a great crowd. He stops them. And he said, you guys don't know what you're doing. You're coming along for the wrong reasons. You don't know what you're asking for. And I'm going to tell you right now, you need to count the cost. If you're going to follow me, you need to count the cost. And Jesus is very, very clear that there is a cost to following him. One of the things that I tell people often is that once you begin to follow Christ, it is impossible to live like normal. Your life should change. You should begin to do things differently. You might find yourself crawling through the basement of a house on your vacation. Is that normal? Even, especially if it's not even your own house, right? Helping someone that needs help. Or spending time ministering to someone who may need that. Those are things that are very different. In fact, Jesus goes on and he says, you need to hate your parents. Doesn't that sound really strange? I mean, most of the time we don't even like to talk about this passage because we have Jesus saying, whoever does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even your own self cannot be my disciple. That is a strange statement. Because when we think of the phrase, I hate you, what does that really convey? Have you ever told somebody you hated them? You don't have to raise your hand. But usually, doesn't it come out of anger? Or maybe some intense pain, or they did something that really harmed you in some manner. And we say, I hate you, to kind of get back at them, right? All of that anger, maybe all of that bitterness, all of that hurt, all of that emotion that's penned up inside comes out in 3 little words. And it is targeted to do one thing, to cut them to the core. When we say the words, I hate you, it is to cut them to the core. It is to hurt them the way they have hurt us. That is not what Jesus is talking about at all. He is not saying, go home and tell your parents you hate them. Go home and tell your wife and kids you hate them. Go home and tell your brothers and sisters you hate them. That's not it at all. But he is saying, if you're going to follow me, there is a huge cost. And you need to be thinking about this because it's going to change the way you live. See, Jesus isn't saying to go home to all your friends and family and say that. In fact, if you were to read the rest of the scriptures around this, what does Jesus command us to do? To love. I'm so glad you got that. Because most of the time in church, you're good with love others, love God, and Jesus, right? Those are 3 pretty safe answers. Jesus spends so much time telling us to love others. In fact, that's what drove our mission trip, right? The call to love others. And so for them to Jesus to turn around and say hate others, it's not the same thing. It's not the opposite here. In fact, what he's saying is, you need to love me so much that in comparison, it seems like you hate others. But even that doesn't seem quite right, does it? I love you so much so I exclude everything else? No, it's a step beyond that. I love you so much that the relationship we have has changed the other relationships in my life. Because think about your relationship with your parents, with your siblings, with your spouse and your children. Isn't there some demand there? Maybe? Now I know that on Jen, there's absolutely no demand being married to me. It's the easiest thing in the world. She wakes up every day and just says, God, easiest man in the world to be married to, right? That's what I say about her. That's what I say about her. It is because of my relationship with God, things with my wife should be different than they are for somebody who doesn't have a relationship with God. Because I love God, my relationship with my kids should look different than somebody who doesn't. Because of my relationship with God, my relationship with my brothers and sisters, my co-workers, my nieces, my nephews, everyone that I come in contact with should be driven by this relationship with God, not the other way around. It's not that it just takes priority. It's that it takes priority and then changes the way every other relationship operates. Does that make sense? Because if I really believe this, love God with all your heart, with all that you are, and love others as much as you love yourself, there is a phrase that I should strike from my vocabulary. It would be that I hate you phrase. If I really love God, that's a phrase that should never come out of my mouth to anyone. What do you think about that? If I love God and really believe this, I should never be saying those words that would actually hurt someone. That's challenging. Because the normal reaction is, I treat you the way you treat me. Right? And occasionally, we have learned that if I treat you that way first, I can guarantee what kind of response I'll get. My neighbor is trying to figure me out. We've been neighbors for about 4 years now. And I think he keeps trying to see how far he can push till I won't be a good pastor. Okay? I think I told you a few weeks ago, Rick brought me a trailer load full of well-decomposed horse manure. I wanted that for my garden. It just looked like topsoil. It looked great. I mean, no smell to it. It was as fine as could be. And I wanted some of that for my garden. I needed a good fertilizer, and I had some low spots in my yard I wanted to patch in. And so I had this huge trailer of manure in my front yard. It sat there for 3 days. My neighbor saw it, and we were talking. He's like, "What's in your driveway?" I said, "Oh, that's a trailer full of dirt." And he's like, "Really? Where'd you get that dirt?" I said, "Well, I've got a friend that, raises horses, and this is old horse manure." And he said, "Really?" And he went home. He waited. 3 days later, he saw me shoveling it off the trailer. He came running. I don't think he could have moved any faster. He came running out to see me. And he said, "You know, Pastor, I've heard stories of pastors shoveling that stuff around, but I just had to see one in action." It was funny. I laughed. But I know he did it. In fact, my response was, "You should have taken a picture. It would last longer." And he laughed. He said, "I thought about it, but I thought you might be offended." He's trying to figure out. He's not used to that kind of response. Because I know some pastors, if you were to tell them that, they would have been really offended. In fact, you might have heard some things that were not good, pastor, right? But when we love God with all that we are, and we really buy into this, loving others as we love ourselves, we learn to be able to take a joke. We learn to be able to put the relationship with God and the relationship with this person above our own need for feeling validated. Because what I would really love is for him to say, "Boy, Jamie, you are the best pastor I've ever known." Wouldn't that be great? It would. I'll take this other one, though, because it's making them think. And see, we have that ability to reach people in a way that they're not expecting. It's counting the cost. Instead of just flying off the handle and saying, "That's inappropriate. How dare you talk to a pastor like that? I'm a man of God. Why would you do that?" It's counting the cost and saying, "It is funny. I can laugh. I've heard stories of pastors spreading it around too." But if you're going to count the cost, the next part of this is making a clear decision. Because what Jesus was trying to help the crowd around him understand that day is, don't just come along because everybody else is on the bandwagon. Don't just follow along and walk along the road because you think you're going to get good stuff out of it, or you think your life is going to be better. He says, guys, you need to count the cost. You need to look at what this is how hard this is going to be, where this road could lead, and you need to make a real clear decision. Because you either choose to follow along for yourself, or you don't. It's not a maybe, it's not a maybe if it's working. It's a very clear yes or no what he tells them. He said, guys, you need to think about this in the same way. No king goes into war and says, maybe we'll win, maybe we won't. We'll see what happens on the battlefield. I mean, how many of you would want that to be your king? Especially if it's your lives on the battleline. You wouldn't want that, right? We'll see. I don't know if 10,000 men can beat 20,000. Guess we'll find out at the end of the day. Or how many of you have ever done a building project? Anybody ever build anything? Anybody have any unfinished projects? I do, by the way, if you're looking to help. Funny story. Talk about the love of God and love of others driving your relationship. I was having dinner with my in-laws last night. My father-in-law said, hey, Jamie, tell me about your mission trip. So I told him all the good stuff that happened and all the great relationships that we made and how we were able to help people and just connect. And he said, that's awesome. He said, how do you determine your projects? I'm walking right into this, by the way. And I tell him, oh, we just meet people. And he said, really? He said, well, I know this guy in your area who has a garage that needs some drywall work and some insulation and some other finish work done around the house. And I almost said, great, who is he? But I knew he was talking about at that point, because that's my house. It's counting the cost. It's realizing that God drives absolutely everything and then making that clear decision. Because becoming a disciple of Jesus is a lifelong decision. It's something that we deal with every single day. And it's why it can't be entered into lightly. I would love it if when people became a Christian, I got to have the conversation with them that I do with young couples when they get married. And what I explain to them is that when I stand up front and I do the declaration of intent, or the declaration of consent, is the way it's actually worded in the minister's manual. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you know what you're doing? That's what I ask the groom. Do you know what you're doing? And then I look at the bride. Do you know what you're doing? And they all say yes. And then, because didn't we all say that, right? We all said yes, and at some point along the way, we ask ourselves, what did I get into? It's the same thing with being a Christian. It's the same thing with making that clear choice. And what I want people to understand is that no one can decide this for you. And Jesus is so clear about that. It's not your parents' decision. It's not your brother's decision. It's not your children's decision. It's not your spouse's decision. It's your decision, because if it's not your decision, it won't last. It won't work very well. And so Jesus is so clear that no one can sign you up for him. No one can make you a disciple for him. You have to do it on your own. And then after you make that decision, I believe that we reaffirm it every single day. In fact, I believe that we affirm it moment by moment. In the way that we act, the way that we treat those around us, the way that we relate to God, the way that we even see the world and see people in need. We choose daily, and the choice to follow is confirmed daily. Because every day is a new journey. Every day is a new conversation. Every day is the opportunity to meet new people. And you know what I've been paying attention to lately? The number of times that I see the same people in Meadville that I don't know. Have you ever done that? Jen and I went garage sailing Friday morning. We saw the same woman at 3 garage sales and then Walmart. I thought, I don't know her name. What a small town. We choose daily. And Jesus chose daily to continue that ministry. Every day he made the decision to continue on the path that would ultimately lead him to the cross. And he wasn't caught off guard or surprised when Brian was talking about him being arrested in front of the crowd. He knew exactly where that was leading. He had made the decision and was very clear to do that. He didn't say to the religious leaders, I had no idea that the things I did upset you. He knew all the way along what was happening. And you know, when I talk to my neighbors about God, I know what I'm doing. We've been building this path together. We have been building lives together. Do you think about that with your neighbors? Pray for my neighbors almost every day. And even when they do stuff that drives me crazy, I'm sure your neighbors don't. And I'm certain that we never drive our neighbors crazy. That we still look at that relationship with God first, as driving everything that we do. So instead of talking to them and saying, boy, I wish you wouldn't do that, let it slide. Because ultimately, it's not about us. And finally, Jesus says we have to carry that cross. Now, have you ever heard people say that? We've got to carry our cross. It's my burden to bear. And usually, it's about something that seems kind of personal. You know, it's my burden to bear, and even we've said that as a joke. But I was thinking about this. How do we carry our cross? What are things that we can actually do that will help us with this clear decision that we've made, with the intent that we have to follow Jesus? What are some things that we can actually do on a daily basis? And so I made you a list of 18 things. You might ask, why 18 things? That's where I ran out of paper. Well, I wanted you to have the list. And so I gave you a list of 18 ways that I think we can practice carrying our cross on a daily basis to help us make sure that this relationship that we have with God is first, and that it is redefining all of the relationships around us. And so I just want to I want to go through it real quick. The very first thing, focus on God instead of yourself. It is so easy to get an overinflated opinion of yourself and to fly off the handle when somebody says something that was clearly a joke and is funny, i.e., spreading manure. Choose to see others as God sees them. And for me, this is that striking I hate you line right out of my vocabulary. Because nowhere in the scriptures do I find God, do I find Christ saying, I hate you. Listen to the Spirit or that inner voice. And this is something that I believe gets easier the more often we do it. We know that once you receive Christ, that God comes to live within you. And I believe that the Spirit gives us direction. A lot of times we call it our conscience, but it goes beyond that. Listen to that inner voice. Love others as much as you love yourself. That's a tough one, isn't it? Love others as much as you love yourself. Serve others instead of yourself. Forgive others even if they don't deserve it. Have you ever hung on to give someone forgiveness until they deserved it? Or until they ask for it? And I'm not going to forgive them until they apologize. You know how many times I've told people you may never get that apology? Forgive others even if they don't deserve it. Tithe your finances, time, and talents. Sacrifice instead of indulging. I got to tell you, that one cut me. I like to indulge, especially when it's hot. I really like to indulge with ice cream. Or maybe something special that I really like, or going here, going there. Sacrifice instead of indulging. Take a daily inventory to assess your life. Give up sin. That one doesn't get much clearer, does it? That might even fall into that sacrifice instead of indulge. Pray without ceasing. And often when we do that, we pray for ourselves, right? Include in that prayer for others. Because if I love others as much as I love myself, then I should pray for others too, right? Read scripture. Fast from food, TV, or even technology. It could be. Engage others in God conversations. Celebrate God's faithfulness. Seek good counsel during struggles. And I think the last one, part of carrying our cross daily, is to accept God's forgiveness for us. This is a short list. I told you I ran out of paper. At 18, I was still going strong. Brian and I sat down, we were talking about these, and we kept all of these ways to carry your cross. So on the back, if you can think of more, write them down. Because if we don't think about this stuff, and if we don't talk about this stuff, we'll just go along and we won't do it. It's not that we don't mean to. It's not that we don't want to. It'll never happen because we didn't think about doing it. See, being a Christian isn't something that you just fall into. It's something that we choose daily to do. It's a way that we choose to live and to act and to engage others in everyday life. And that relationship with God changes the way we interact with every person that we come in contact with. It means that we shouldn't rejoice when the state cop pulls over the guy who just passed you because you moved out of the lane because he was riding your bumper. Happened last night. Driving home 79, I've got this guy right on my bumper. I will admit, I may have driven the speed limit for a while just to keep him there. And then I moved over and he took off flying by. Wouldn't you know, he got pulled over. And for a brief moment, yes! Bad. We should not rejoice in somebody else's problems. I share that because we can all relate to it, right? We shouldn't rejoice in somebody else's problems. That's not carrying our cross. That's really not letting God's love redefine all of our relationships. This is tough stuff. It is intentional stuff. But I am convinced that it changes lives, starting with our own. Hey, let's close in prayer together. Dear God, we just thank you for this time together. God, we thank you for the Gospel of Luke. We thank you for this message that was shared of how Jesus stopped everybody on the road and said, hey guys, this is more than just getting the stuff that you want. This is a way of life that is different from everything else you know. God, help us to love others the way you love us. Help us not to rejoice in the problems and the mistakes of others. God, help us not to take ourselves so seriously that we can't find the humor in things. God, help us to not miss you in all of the little conversations and the things that happen throughout every single day. God, we just thank you for this beautiful day. God, we truly do give you our heart and ask that you will just guide and direct us every step of the way. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.